Hello and welcome to another episode of MTG Brewery. This is the opposite of Lucky number 2. This is me, Josh, the owner of the channel, Pierce's Blog, and I normally come to you with aggro, but obviously this is something a little different this time. It's a Grixy control deck that I brewed up for some fun with Standard. This deck isn't really made to be competitive. It's more for some casual funness, playing with some fun one-ofs and stuff like that. And I still wanted it to be good, so I kind of built this more prepared for mid-range. And I hope you guys like this. It's control is not really my kind of thing, but you never know. So we're gonna start with the Planeswalkers. We have one Jace Memory Adept. He's in his control. You want to +1 a couple turns till you can have 2 or more counter spells in your hand to keep him from being desphered or Hero's Downfalled, and then you start zeroing him. Against aggro, you really don't want to mill them out. You want to +1 and then draw 20 cards off his ultimate, and then from there you're probably going to win the game. Because I've done that a few times. With just go -7, I'll draw 20 cards, and I win the game. It's normally what happens. Because once you draw 20 cards, you just don't tap out for the rest of the game with a threat on board. Or you just play a threat that you drew and have all answers for the rest of the game. And we have 2 Jace Architect Thought. He's really standard in blue control decks nowadays. Not really much need to explain him. He's just really good card advantage and really good against aggro by slowing them down. So that's why he's there. We have 1 Ashiok. That's really more for the mid-range matchups, which is kind of our easiest matchup. We have so much removal. And they tend to have big, beefy creatures. This can put those creatures in play on your side, like Stormbreath Dragons, stuff like that. You can just take your opponents, put them into play, and have them protect you for the rest of the game until you can kill them with this or some other way. We have 1 Thassa, really in there for the Scry one at your upkeep. She can sometimes become a 5/5 indestructible, but you're really focused on scrying one at your upkeep, being able to filter through your cards, especially in a control matchup where you have so much removal in the deck. That's really bad. You just really want to be drawing live cards or lands, and she really helps you get to those. Then we have Aetherling. He's one of our win conditions. Really standard. There's 2 instead of 1, which a lot of decks cut down to 1. But Thoughtseize isn't standard, so our deck, when you only run 1 Aetherling, if it's in your opening hand and they Thoughtseize it, you're in a big spot of trouble, especially with this deck where we don't have access to Elspeth and stuff to win the game that way. So that's why we're running 2. And then we have 1 Master of Cruelty. He's one of those fun cards. He's a 1/4 First Strike Death Touch for 5. He can only attack alone, and when he deals combat damage to a player, prevent that damage, and they go to 1. Their life total becomes 1. Which is really good, because against a control deck, they really can't. They just have to answer that if they've used answers already. They can't afford to let it stick, even if they use 1 Supreme Verdict or a Detention Sphere or Hero's Downfall. They have to use something that could hit one of your other threats, and at worst, he's going to eat something that you really don't want them to have anyway. And against aggro, in mid-range, he's almost impossible from their beat, because they just can't attack through it. He's a wall, and if you've stabilized, you can just attack and make them pretty much sacrifice creature every turn to not go to 1. And with this deck, they really don't want to risk that, because there are ways to kill them from 1 life very easily. So that's why he's in there. Then we have our last creature, Frostborn Weird. It's a standard in the mono blue and mono red devotion decks. He's really in here because he's a 1/4, and against aggro, which is our toughest matchup, even with all our cards for it, he's just gonna block for multiple turns, and he can trade up if you need him to with his pump ability. So he can trade with bigger things, or he can just stay there and block forever. So that's why he's in there. And then we start with our sorceries. We have 2 Rakdos Return. Really in there for the control matchups. We needed to main deck some really powerful cards for them. This is why we have a Memory Adept in the main deck and 2 Aetherlings. This card is also really good against them and really good against mid-range. It's not too amazing against aggro. You really want to be playing removal or blockers. So against aggro it comes out, but in every other matchup it's really good. And then we have 1 Anger the Gods. That's straight up just for aggro. It can also kill Sylvan Caryatids, which you really don't want your opponent ramping, and we don't have a lot of ways to deal with that outside of a way. And using a way to kill a Sylvan Caryatid is really, you don't want to do it, but you will if you have to keep them off that 1 mana. so they can't power things faster than you can answer them. We have 2 Read the Bones for some cheap draw. It's really bad against aggro, but we like it in the other matchups. The ability to Scry 2 made it good against control, better than Divination, even though Divination is better against aggro. So that's why we're running Read the Bones over Divination. And we have 2 Mortars, which is just another access to a Wrath spell. It's better against mid-range, and it can kill Blood Barons. We needed something a little bigger than Anger of the Gods for other matchups, so we put this in there because it can kill all the bigger creatures, and against aggro decks, if we get 6 mana, we can overload it, and hopefully just stabilize from there with all our other spot removal we normally have. And when we come to our instance, we have 1 opportunity, which is really just our Sphinx's Revelation, since we don't really have access to Sphinx's Revelation in Grixis. This is 6 mana, just draw 4 cards. It's the only reason it's in there. It's our version of Sphinx's Revelation, because we really needed a way to refill our hand when we were out of gas or answers, and this did that. And in control matchups, just drawing 4 cards is insanely good. They really don't want that to happen, and if they do, you'll normally have counterspells, because we're main decking more counterspells than other control decks. And we have 2 Heroes Downfall. No really need to explain that. Instant speed, unconditional removal. And then we have Faraway, which is like a mini Wrath for a deck like this, where you're running a lot of other spot removal to support it. And the being able to make your opponent sack creatures, it deals with Blood Barons, Obsidian, 7 Carriot Hits, stuff like that. That's normally really hard for other decks to answer, unless we have like a Mortars or something for Blood Barons. But it answers that. It can unsummon things when you need it, so it fits in the 2 and 3 drop of the curve. And we really needed a bunch of 2 drops for the aggro matchup, so that's why that's in there. And we have 2 Dissolve, really standard counter spell. You just counter target spell, scry 1. It can help you hit your land drops, put extra lands to the bottom. Like just a really solid counter spell. And then we have a Turn Burn. That's really in there because it answers pretty much everything, with the exception of Mistcutter Hydra in Standard. So we really need more answers to Obsidian and stuff like that. That's really good against our deck. It kills pretty much everything in the format, other than gods. And gods, which is a big deal. That's why we have 1 in there. It kills gods, which we really don't have like access to Detention Sphere, so we needed an answer to the gods. And then we have Counterflux, arguably the best counterspell in Standard, because it's uncounterable. So in the control matchups, you're just gonna counter whatever you don't want them to have, even if they have counterspell backup. It doesn't matter. They don't get it. And if you ever get into a counter war fight, you can just overload this instead of them just countering your counter spell that was on the stack. You just counter their creature, or you can just counter all their spells, which doesn't happen often, but it's always fun to do. Not always good, but fun. And we have 2 Lightning Strikes. That's just another 2 mana removal spell that can also hit players and planeswalkers. Kind of supports our Master of Cruelties. And then we have our last spells. We have 1 Rakdos Keyrune and 1 Dimir Keyrune for ramp, and then they're good against control because they'll have to answer them at instant speed instead of sorcery speed, unless they just want a Detention Sphere, which you're more than fine with, because that's a planeswalker that you're going to have that they didn't answer. So that's why. And then we have 2 Ratchet Bombs, because, like I said, we don't have access to Detention Sphere, so once it resolves, it's kind of a problem. We didn't want to run Cyclonic Rift, because if we bounce it, if we don't have a counterspell to counter on the way back down, we didn't really do anything. So we needed this to answer, like, Reaper of the Wilds, Whip of Erebos, stuff like that. That's Underworld Connection, stuff that's really hard for our deck to answer, so we're main decking 2. And then with our lands, we have 12 Shocks, we have around the battlefield tapped lands, and then we have our basics. So that's my Grixis control deck I made. I hope you guys enjoyed it. All the way from the standard main deck Jaces to the fun, casual Master of Cruelties in there. So we really hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll hope to see you next time. Bye!